Studies of more than 90,000 people across 22 cultures revealed that most humans are more disposed to optimism than pessimism. Indeed, many of us have what researcher Neil Weinstein in 1980-1982 terms an unrealistic optimism about future life events. Partly because there is relative pessimism about others' fates. Students perceive themselves as far less likely than their classmates to get a good job, perceive themselves as far more likely than their classmates to get a good job, draw a good salary, and own a home. They also see themselves as far less likely to experience negative events, such as developing a drinking problem, having a heart attack before the age of 40, or being fired. In an international survey conducted in March 2020 during the coronavirus pandemic, 45% of participants believed that the average person might spread the virus if they traveled while infected, but only 25% thought that they themselves would spread the disease if they traveled. Illusory optimism increases our vulnerability. Believing ourselves immune to misfortune. Studies of more than 90,000 people across 22 cultures revealed that most humans are more disposed to optimism than pessimism. Indeed, for most of us have what researcher Neil Weinstein, 1980-1982, terms an unrealistic optimism about future events, partly because of their relative pessimism about others' fates. Students perceive themselves as far more likely than their classmates to get a good job, draw a good salary, and to own a home. They also see themselves as far less likely to experience negative events, such as developing a drinking problem, having a heart attack before the age of 40, or being fired. In an international survey conducted in March 2020 during the coronavirus pandemic, 45% of participants believed that the average person might spread the virus if they traveled while infected, but only 25% thought that they themselves would spread the disease if they traveled. Illusory optimism increases our vulnerability, believing ourselves immune to misfortune. We do not take sensible precautions. People trying to quit smoking who believe that they are above average in willpower are more likely to keep cigarettes around and to stand near others who are smoking. Behavior is likely to lead to relapse of smoking. Elderly drivers who rated themselves as above average were 4 times more likely than most modest drivers to flunk a driving test and to be rated unsafe. Students who enter university with inflated assessments of their academic ability often suffer deflating self-esteem and well-being and are more likely to drop out. They will initially believe that they are so smart that they don't need to study, and they are quickly proven wrong. On the other hand, optimism definitely beats pessimism in promoting self-efficacy, health, and well-being. And as natural optimists, most people believe that they will be happier in their lives in the future, a belief that surely helps create happiness in the present. Pessimists often die sooner, apparently because they are more likely to suffer unfortunate accidents. Generally speaking, people who are unrealistically positive about themselves are usually happier, more satisfied with their lives, and less likely to be depressed. Yet a dash of realism, of what Julie Norham in 2000 calls defensive pessimism, can sometimes save us from the perils of unrealistic optimism. Defensive pessimism anticipates problems, motivates effective coping. As a Chinese proverb says, be prepared for danger while staying in peace. Students who exhibit excessive optimism, as students destined for low grades do, benefit from some self-doubt, which motivates study. Students who are overconfident tend to underprepare, whereas their equally able but less confident peers study harder with higher grades. Viewing things in a more immediate, realistic way often helps. Students in one experiment were widely optimistic in predicting their test performance when the test was hypothetical, but they were surprisingly accurate when the test was imminent. Believing you're great when nothing can prove you wrong is one thing, but with an evaluation fast approaching, it is not best to look like a bragging fool. It is also important to listen to criticism. One gentle rule I often tell my students, wrote David Dunning in 2006, is that if 2 people independently gave the same piece of negative feedback, they should at least consider the possibility that it might be true. So there is power to negative as well as positive thinking. The moral is success in school and beyond requires enough optimism to sustain hope and enough pessimism to motivate concern. False consensus and uniqueness. We have a curious tendency to enhance our self-images by overestimating or underestimating how much others think and act as we do. On matters of opinion, we find support for our positions by overestimating how much others agree. This phenomenon is called the false consensus effect. In the summer before the 2020 U.S. presidential election, 83% of Democrats believed voters would elect their candidate, Joe Biden. Simultaneously, 84% of Republicans believed voters would re-elect their candidate, Donald Trump. White Australians, prejudiced against the Aborigines, were more likely to believe that other whites were also prejudiced. The sense we make of the world seems like common sense. When we behave badly or fail at a task, we reassure ourselves by thinking that such lapses are common. After one person lies to another, the liar begins to perceive the other person as dishonest. If we feel sexual desire towards another, we may overestimate the other's reciprocal desire. We guess that others think and act as we do. I lie, but doesn't everyone? If we cheat on our income taxes, smoke, and enhance our appearance, we are likely to overestimate the number of people who do likewise. As former Baywatch actor David Hasselhoff says, "I've had Botox. Everyone has. We don't see things as they are," says the proverb. We see things as we are. Robin Dawes in 1990 proposed that this false consensus may occur because we generalize from a limited sample, which prominently includes ourselves. Lacking other information, why not project ourselves? Why not impute our own knowledge to others and use our responses as a clue to their likely response? Also, we are more likely to spend time with people who share our attitudes, behaviors, and consequently to judge the world from the people we know. Small wonder that Germans tend to think that the typical European looks rather German, whereas the Portuguese see Europeans as looking more Portuguese. On matters of ability, or when we behave well or successfully, however, false uniqueness effect more often occurs. We serve our self-image by seeing our talents and moral behaviors as relatively unusual. Dutch college students prefer being part of a larger group in matters of opinion such as politics, false consensus, but wanted to be part of a smaller group in matters such as tastes or musical preferences, false uniqueness. After all, a band isn't cool anymore if too many people like it. Female college students who choose a designated driver underestimated how many other women would take the same precaution. Thus, we may see our failings as relatively normal and our virtues as relatively exceptional. To sum it up, self-serving bias appears as self-serving attributions, self-congratulatory comparisons, and illusory optimism, false consensus for one's failings. Explaining self-serving biases. Why do people perceive themselves as self-enhancing ways? Perhaps the self-serving bias occurs because of the errors in how we process and remember information about ourselves. Comparing ourselves with others requires us to notice, assess, and recall their behavior and ours. This creates multiple opportunities for flaws in our information processing. Recall that married people gave themselves credit for doing more housework than their spouses did. That might occur when we remember what we've done, but not what our partner did. I could easily picture myself picking up the laundry off the bedroom floor, but I was less aware of the times that I absent-mindedly overlooked it. Are biased perceptions then simply a perceptual error, an emotion-free glitch in how we process information? Are self-serving motives also involved? It is now clear from the research that we have multiple motives. Questing for self-knowledge, we're motivated to assess our competence. That's what this is. Assessing our competence. Questioning our self-confirmation. We're motivated to verify our self-conceptions. Questing for self-affirmation. We are especially motivated to enhance our self-image. Trying to increase self-esteem then helps the power of our self-serving bias. Social psychologist Daniel Baston surmised, the head is an extension of the heart. So what is self-serving bias? Summing it up. Which we're almost done. Contrary to the presumption that most people suffer from low self-esteem or feelings of inferiority, researchers consistently find that most people exhibit self-serving bias. In experiments in everyday life, we often take credit for our successes while blaming failures on the situation. Most people rate themselves as better than average on subjective desirable traits and abilities. We exhibit unrealistic optimism about our futures. We overestimate the commonality of our opinions and foibles, false consensus, while overestimating the commonality of our abilities and virtues, false uniqueness. Such perceptions arise partly from a motive to maintain and enhance self-esteem, a motive that protects people from depression, that contributes to misjudgment and group conflict. Self-serving bias can be adaptive in that it allows us to savor the good things that happen in our lives. When bad things happen, however, self-serving bias can also have the maladaptive effect of causing us to blame others or feel cheated out of something we deserved. So how do people manage their self-preservation? So far, we have seen that the self is at the center of our social worlds, that self-esteem and self-advocacy pay some dividends, and that self-serving bias influences evaluations. Perhaps you have wondered, are self-enhancing expressions always sincere? Do people have the same feelings privately as they express publicly, or are they just putting on a positive face when living with self-doubt? Self-handicapping. Sometimes people sabotage their chances of success by creating impediments that make success less likely. Okay, it's called self-handicapping. Imagine yourself in a position of the Duke University participants of Stephen Bergles and Edward Jones, 1978. You guess your answers to some difficult cognitive ability questions and are told yours was one of the best scores seen to date. Feeling incredibly lucky, you then offered a choice between two drugs before answering more of these challenging questions. One drug will aid intellectual performance and the other will inhibit it. Which drug do you want? Most students wanted the drug that would supposedly disrupt their thinking, thus providing them a handy excuse for doing badly. Researchers have documented other ways people self-handicapped. Fearing failure, people will reduce their preparation for an important individual athletic event, give their opponent an advantage, perform poorly at the beginning of a task to not create unreachable expectations, leave schoolwork to the last minute so that they can use procrastination as an excuse for poor performance. If you try to fail and succeed, what have you done? Far from being deliberately self-destructive, such behaviors typically have self-protective aim. I'm not really a failure. I would have just done well except for this problem. Unfortunately, this strategy usually backfires. Students who self-handicap end up with lower GPAs. Why would people handicap themselves with self-defeating behaviors? Recall that we eagerly protect our self-images by attributing failures to external forces. Thus, fearing failure, people might handicap themselves by partying half the night before a job interview and playing video games instead of studying before a big exam. When self-image is tied up with performance, it can be more self-deflating. To try hard and then fail than to procrastinate and have a ready excuse. If we fail while handicapping in some way, we can cling to a sense of competence. If we succeed under such conditions, it can only boost our self-image. Handicaps protect both self-esteem and public image by allowing us to attribute failures to something temporary or external. I was feeling sick, I was out too late the night before, rather than a lack of talent or ability. After losing to some younger rivals, tennis great Martina Navratilova confessed that she was afraid to play my best. I was scared to find out if they could beat me when I'm playing my best, because if they can, then I'm finished. Impression management. Self-serving bias, false modesty, and self-handicapping reveal the depth of our concern for self-image. To varying degrees, we are continually managing the impressions that we create. Whether we wish to impress, intimidate, or seem helpless, we are social animals playing to an audience. So great is the human desire for social acceptance that it can lead people to risk harming themselves through smoking, binge eating, premature sex, drug and alcohol abuse. Self-preservation refers to our wanting to present a desired image to both an external audience as well to an internal audience, ourselves. We work at managing the impressions we create. We excuse, justify, and apologize as necessary to shore up our self-esteem and to verify our self-images. Just as we preserve our self-esteem, we must also make sure not to brag too much or to risk the disapproval of others. In one study, students who were told, "Put your best face forward," actually made a more negative impression on people they had just met than those who were not were not under self-presentational demands. One self-presentation strategy is the humble brag, an attempt to disguise bragging behind the complaints of false humility. I still can't believe that I was the one who got the job out of 300 applicants. No makeup, and I still get hit on. One study found that humble bragging backfires, failing to either convey humility or impress others. Social interaction is a careful balance of looking good while not looking too good. That seems to be particularly true in collectivistic cultures, where modesty is the default strategy to avoid offending others. When there was no risk of offense, Japanese participants self-enhanced as much as Americans. In familiar situations, self-presentation happens without conscious effort. In unfamiliar situations, perhaps at a party or with people that we would like to impress or in conversation with, a crush, we are acutely self-conscious of the impressions that we are creating and are therefore less modest than when among friends who know us well. Preparing to have our photograph taken, we may even try out different faces in the mirror. The upside is that self-presentation can unexpectedly improve mood. People felt significantly better when they thought they would be doing, significantly better than they thought they would be doing their best to put their best face forward and concentrate on making a positive impression on their boyfriend or girlfriend. Elizabeth Dunn and colleagues concluded that date nights for long-term couples work because they encourage active self-presentation, which improves mood. Social media sites such as Instagram provide a new and sometimes intense venue for self-presentation. They are, said communications professor Joseph Walter, like impression management on steroids. Users make careful decisions about which pictures, activities, and interests to highlight on their profiles. Especially for teen girls and young women, self-presentation on social media revolves around choosing the right pose and the right selfie, a process that sometimes leads to anxiety. Given a concern for self-presentation, it's no wonder people will self-handicap when failure might make them look bad. It's no wonder that people take health risks, tanning their skin with wrinkle and cancer-causing radiation, having piercings or tattoos done without proper hygiene, becoming anorexic, or yielding to peer pressures to smoke, get drunk, or do drugs. It's no wonder that people express more modestly when their self-flattery is vulnerable to being debunked, perhaps by experts scrutinizing their self-descriptions. Professor Smith will likely express more modesty about the significance of her work when presenting to professional colleagues than when presenting it to students. Her colleagues will have the ammunition to shoot her down. For some people, self-conscious presentation is a way of life. They continually monitor their own behavior and note how others react, then adjust their social performance to gain the desired effect. Those who score high on a scale of self-monitoring, who, for example, agree, I tend to be what people expect of me, act like social chameleons. They use self-preservation to adjust their behavior in response to external situations. They have attuned their behavior to the situation. They are more likely to express attitudes they don't really hold, and less likely to express or act in their own attitudes. Mark Leary in 2004b express or act on their own attitudes. As Mark Leary in 2004b observed, the self they know often differs from the self they show. As social chameleons, those who score high in self-monitoring are less committed to their relationships and more likely to be dissatisfied in their marriages. On the other hand, self-monitors may rack up more connections online. For example, they post more on Facebook, they receive more likes from friends. Those low in self-monitoring care less about what others think. They are more internally guided and are more likely to talk and act as they feel and believe. For example, if asked to list their thoughts about gay couples, they would simply express what they think regardless of the attitudes of their anticipated audience. As you might imagine, someone who is extremely low in self-monitoring could come across as an insensitive bore, whereas high self-monitoring could result in dishonest behavior, worthy of a con artist. Most of us fall somewhere in between the two extremes, presenting oneself in ways that create a desired impression, as a delicate balancing act. People want to be seen not only as capable, but also as modest and honest. In most social situations, modesty creates a good impression of unsolicited boasts, a good impression and unsolicited boast creates a bad one. Hence, the false modesty phenomenon. We often display lower self-esteem than we privately feel. But when we have obviously done extremely well, the insecurity of a good disclaimer, I did well, it's no big deal, the humble brag, may be relevant. To make a good impression, to appear modest yet competent, requires a social skill. Social skill. Summing it up, so how do people manage their self-perceptions? As social animals, we adjust our world and our actions to suit our audiences. To varying degrees, we note our performance and adjust it to create impressions we desire. Sometimes people self-handicapped with defeating behaviors that protect self-esteem and provide excuses for failure. Self-presentation refers to our wanting to present favorable image to both external audience and to an internal audience. With regard to the external audience, those who score high on a scale of self-monitoring, they adjust their behavior to each situation, whereas those low on self-monitoring may do so little social adjusting as they seem they're insensitive to it. That's basically what that's saying. Concluding thoughts. Twin truths: the perils of pride and the powers of positive thinking. This chapter offers two memorable truths: the truth of self-efficacy and the truth of self-serving bias. The truth concerning self-efficacy encourages us not to resign ourselves to bad situations. We need to persist despite the initial failures and to exert effort without being overly distracted by self-doubts. Likewise, secure self-esteem can be adaptive. When we believe in positive possibilities, we are less vulnerable to depression and we feel less secure. Thus, it is important to think positively and to try hard, but not to be so self-confident that our goals are illusory and we alienate others with our narcissism. Don't do that. Taking self-efficacy too far leads to blaming the victim. If positive thinking can accomplish anything, then we have only ourselves to blame. If we are unhappily married, poor, or depressed, for shame. If only we had tried harder, been more disciplined, less stupid. This viewpoint fails to acknowledge that bad things can happen to good people. Life's greatest achievements, but also life's greatest disappointments, are born of the highest expectations. These twin truths, self-efficacy, self-serving bias, remind us of what Pascal thought 300 years ago. No single truth is ever sufficient without the world, because the world is complex. Any truth separated from its complementary truth is a half-truth.